Before we get into today's video, I did want to let you guys know that this video is for educational purposes only. Please remember to be kind to everybody everywhere, in your everyday life, in your home, in the grocery store, and especially in the comment section down below. Please do not show hate to anybody, anywhere. Good morning, my lovelies, my beauties, my friends. My name is Christina and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, thank you so much for clicking on this video. I really hope that you will subscribe, stick around, take a chance in hearing some things that I have to say. And if you are a returning subscriber, y'all already know, y'all are my babies. So good morning, good morning, good morning. How is everybody doing today? I hope you all are having an amazing day. I hope you guys are ready for another video in our Spooky Week episodes. This is the story of Ed Gein, and a movie or very famous movie / series was loosely based on Ed Gein's story. And his story is even kind of a familiar story to some people. So let's just start at the beginning. Ed Gein was born in La Crosse, Wisconsin on August 27th of 1906. He was the second of two sons to his father George and his mother Augusta. His older brother's name was Henry. Now, Ed's mother, Augusta, was known to be a very religious Lutheran. She preached to her sons all the time about the immoralities of the world and about sin and about women, about the evils of drinking. And she also told her sons that women were basically evil and they were all promiscuous except for herself, of course. It was said that Augusta made time every afternoon to read the Bible to her boys. She would read the Old Testament and Revelation, and she would highlight on like the bad stuff that happened in the Bible and about where people would be punished for this sin, and it would come with all of this like fire and chaos. It was rumored that Augusta actually hated her husband George and that he was an alcoholic that could never keep a job. He had worked as a carpenter, a tanner, who was someone who treats skins and hides from animals, and an insurance salesman. When he lived in La Crosse, George owned a local grocery shop, but he sold the business and left the city with his family to live in isolation on a 155-acre farm in a town called Plainfield in Wisconsin. This would become the Gein family's permanent residence. Augusta enjoyed being isolated. She thought that this was the perfect way to keep her sons isolated from the sins and the evils of the world. Ed was very, very close with his mother, and it was said that the only time that he ever left the farm was when he would go to school, and when school was over, he would come straight back home and start working on chores around the house and on the farm. Ed was very shy, and his teachers and classmates remembered him as having strange mannerisms. Ed was described as kind of like the oddball or the weird kid in the area. He was never rude, but he was just strange or described as strange and really stayed to himself. Different classmates and teachers would say that he would do things like just randomly burst out with laughter, like he was laughing at his own jokes, or he had like a movie playing in his head and he would just start laughing about it. And to make things worse, it was rumored that his mother Augusta would punish him anytime Ed tried to make friends or like hang out with other kids. Now, despite being what people would consider underdeveloped socially, Ed did really good in school. I mean, he was a smart boy. His social skills were the thing that was kind of off. And Ed especially loved reading. He read any chance that he could get, and Ed would really get lost in his imagination while reading these books. On April 1st of 1940, Ed's father George passed away of heart failure caused by his alcoholism. He died at the age of 66. Ed and his brother Henry began doing odd jobs around the town to help cover living expenses, and the brothers were actually considered reliable and honest by people in the community. While both of the boys worked as handymen in their spare time, Ed would actually babysit little children in the area any chance that he could get. it was said that Ed could relate to smaller children versus like adults or even kids his age. As the boys continued to grow, Henry, Ed's brother, started dating with and eventually married a divorced woman of 2 and would go on to move out of the house. Now, it is said that Henry really worried about his brother Ed because Ed had such an attachment to his mother. Anytime that Henry complained or said anything negative about their mother, Ed would immediately take up for his mother and begin to like snap back. He was very protective of his mother and attached to his mother, but then again, he was also deemed as very socially strange or awkward and didn't have any other friends. His mother and his brother was basically his only real friends. On May 16th of 1944, Ed was burning away marsh vegetation on the property when the fire got out of control, drawing the attention of a local fire department. By the end of the day, after the fire had been completely put out and the fire department had already left, this is when Ed reported his brother Henry missing. With lanterns and flashlights, a search party came out to help Ed find his brother. Now, it is said that Ed actually led the search party and led the search party directly to where Henry was. Henry was found deceased and lying face down. Apparently, he had been dead for some time, and it appeared that the cause of death was heart failure since he had not been burned or injured otherwise. It was later reported that allegedly Henry had bruises on his head, but the police dismissed the possibility of foul play, and the county coroner later officially listed the cause of death as asphyxiation from inhaling too much of the smoke. The authorities accepted the accident theory, but no official investigation was conducted and an autopsy was never done. Ed and his mother were all each other had now. But then Augusta, Ed's mother, had a debilitating stroke after Henry passed away, and Ed devoted his entire life at this point to taking care of his mother. Sometime in 1945, she had a second stroke and her health deteriorated rapidly. She died on December 29th of 1945 at the age of 67, and Ed, who was now all alone, was completely devastated by his mother's passing. Some people said that Ed sobbed and cried and wailed so loud at her funeral that it was actually a bit disturbing. It wasn't what they would describe as your typical crying of a man who had lost his mother. It was more than that. Ed kept the farm and earned money from odd jobs. He boarded up rooms used by his mother, leaving them untouched. And while the rest of the house became extremely messy, her rooms remained in pristine condition. Ed stayed in a small room next to the kitchen. Now, with Ed being all alone, this is when Ed became very interested in reading pulp magazines. These were fiction-based stories about adventures. Specifically, adventures about cannibals and Nazis. And then Ed apparently took up a huge fascination with the human anatomy. So it's like he was alone and reading again. And now he was reading these magazines about these stories, about these people that were doing all of these crazy things, we'll just say that. And then he started to become like obsessed over the human anatomy. On the morning of November 16th, 1957, Plainfield hardware store owner Bernice Worden disappeared. A local resident would later report that the hardware store's truck had been driven out from the back of the building at around 9:30 a.m., but the hardware store didn't have many customers the entire day because it was deer hunting season and most of the men from town were out in the woods hunting. Bernice Worden's son, Deputy Sheriff Frank Worden, was called and told his mother wasn't at her store, which was very unusual, so Frank decided to go and check on it. Frank entered the store at around 5 p.m. and found the store's cash register open and bloodstains on the floor. Frank told investigators that the evening before his mother disappeared, Ed was at the store and planned on coming back the following morning to buy a gallon of antifreeze. A sales slip for a gallon of antifreeze was the last receipt written by Bernice on the morning that she disappeared. Frank also told investigators that Ed had been coming around the store a lot lately, and that he allegedly had even asked Bernice on a date at one point, but she refused. Later that evening, Ed was arrested at a local grocery store, and later, his whole entire farm was searched by the police department. None of the investigators or anybody at the sheriff's department was prepared for what they would find on Ed's farm. And yes, they did find Bernice. One of the deputies walked in and found Bernice's decapitated body hanging upside down by her legs with a crossbar at her ankles and ropes at her wrists. Her torso was dressed out like a deer. And I'm going to put this lightly. It is what hunters do in order to prepare the deer. Yeah. Slice open the torso. They pull all of the bones and everything out and let it hang after they drain. Her body was dressed out like a hunter's does a deer, I guess. Yeah. But that is definitely not all they found on the Gein farm. As investigators continued to search the house, they also found large piles of human bones. They found a trash can made from skin. They found skin covering chairs in the house. They found where Ed's bed was, the two bedposts were skulls, like real skulls on the bedposts. They found many female skulls with the tops sawed off, bowls that you eat out of made from skulls, a corset made from a female torso skinned from shoulder to waist, leggings that you wear made from skin, and so many more things like that. They found a belt made out of female nipples, like a whole belt that you would wear. Masks, multiple masks that you would wear on your face made from other faces. 9 female genitalia in a box. Okay, you imagine them. They open up the box and they found 9 female genitalia. Fingernails, fingers, lips, 4 noses, and all kinds of just other, like I cannot imagine the intense therapy. I can't imagine that these investigators would have needed after finding this. When I envision these investigators going in the house and opening the next box, I just envision like hurling and crying in fetal positions of just overwhelming of what they saw in that house and how this man was living and how he was going into the town and speaking to people. And they just thought he was weird and quiet and socially awkward, but they didn't know that he had all of these things. And now who do these parts belong to? This is what the investigators are wondering now as well. Ed was immediately brought up to the police station for questioning. He originally wasn't talking much, but after about a day, Ed told investigators that if he could have a slice of apple pie with a slice of cheese on top of it, he would tell them anything they wanted to know. Ed went on to tell investigators that between the years of 1947 and 1952, he made as many as 40 visits to 3 local graveyards at night to exhume recently buried bodies while he was in a dazed-like state. On about 30 of those visits, he said he came out of the daze while in the cemetery and left the grave and returned home empty-handed. On the other occasions, he dug up the graves of recently buried middle-aged women he thought resembled his mother and took the bodies home, where he tanned their skins to make his keepsakes. He said he had been keeping an eye on the obituary section of the newspaper to determine whose grave he wanted to rob and when the funeral would be. Ed also admitted to stealing from 9 graves at a local cemetery and led investigators to their locations. A man named Allen from the State Crime Laboratory opened 3 test graves that were identified by Ed. Ed had robbed the graves soon after the funerals, while the graves were not completed, so they were still shallow. The test graves were exhumed because authorities weren't sure if Ed could really do this by himself, but the graves were found exactly as Ed described. 2 of the exhumed graves were found empty, and most of the body was gone from the 3rd grave, except Ed had returned rings and some body parts to it. So Ed's confessions were mostly corroborated. Ed would go on to say that soon after his mother's passing, he began to go to the graves so he could build a suit of his mother or somebody that looked like his mother, and so he could crawl inside of it and live in it. When Ed was asked if he would have with the bodies, he said no, he couldn't, because anytime he tried, it just smelled too bad. Like he could not with the smell. It was also speculated that Ed originally tried exhuming his mother's body, but that the sand was too difficult for him to dig through. A 16-year-old whose parents were friends with Ed and who had attended ball games and movies with him reported that Ed kept shrunken heads in his house. But Ed told them that they were relics from the Philippines sent by a cousin who had served on the islands during the World War II. However, upon investigation by the police, these were determined to be human facial skins that had been peeled straight off of the bone in order to make these. And then it was said that that 16-year-old had actually been served soup out of these bowls on multiple occasions. Why? Why would you let your child eat that? Even if you thought it was from the Philippines, you'd have been washed and bleached. Oh my gosh. Ed was also considered a suspect in several other unsolved cases in Wisconsin, including the 1953 disappearance of Evelyn Hartley, who was a babysitter in La Crosse where Ed used to live. Now, during questioning, allegedly, one of these sheriffs actually took Ed's head and began to bang it into a brick wall. And because of that, Ed's initial confession was then deemed like they couldn't use it. The judge ruled it inadmissible. And that sheriff that did that ended up passing away from heart failure in 1963 before Ed even went to trial. Many who knew that sheriff said he was traumatized by Ed's crimes, and this, along with the fear of having to testify, especially after banging Ed's head into the wall, caused his death. One of that sheriff's friends said that he was a victim of Ed's crimes, just as if Ed had done the same thing to him as he did to all of those other bodies. Like basically, because he walked in and seen all of the stuff and he was traumatized and he couldn't contain himself and he banged his head into the wall. And then Ed's confession was deemed inadmissible, and then the sheriff was going to have to testify. It was just too much for him. And basically, the friend was saying that Ed, in a roundabout way, was responsible for his death as well. On November 21st of 1957, Ed was charged with 1 count of first-degree murder, and he pled not guilty by reason of insanity. Ed was diagnosed with schizophrenia and then found mentally incompetent to stand trial. He was sent to the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, a maximum security facility in Wisconsin, and was later transferred to the Mendota State Hospital, also in Wisconsin. 11 years later, in 1968, doctors determined Ed was indeed mentally able to confer with counsel and participate in his defense. The trial began on November 7th of 1968, and it lasted for 1 week. A psychiatrist testified that Ed had told him that he didn't know whether the killing of Bernice Worden was intentional or accidental. Ed had told him that while he examined a firearm in Bernice's store, it went off and ended her life. Ed testified that after trying to load the weapon, it discharged. He said he wasn't aiming for Bernice, but didn't remember anything else that happened that morning. At the request of the defense, Ed's trial was held without a jury, and he was found guilty on November 14th. A second trial dealt with Ed's sanity. After testimony by doctors for the prosecution and defense, the judge ruled Ed not guilty by reason of insanity. The judge then committed him to the state hospital for the criminally insane. After Ed's conviction, his house and 195-acre property were appraised at $4,700, which would be the equivalent to $48,000 in 2022. His possessions were scheduled to be auctioned on May 30th of 1958, and rumors were saying that the house and the land that it stood on might become a tourist attraction. However, early on the morning of March 20th, the house was destroyed by a fire. And it is said that when Ed heard about the fire, he shrugged and said, well, just as well. Now, of course, it is rumored, and I mean, it seems pretty obvious, that people in the town set fire to the home because they did not want it to become a tourist attraction. And it was said that the families and the people, because this was a very, 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 very small town. I should have mentioned that in the beginning, like really small, that they were getting all of this like attention, and people were coming in from out of town in order to see this property and see where this person that had done all this stuff had lived. And this is where the idea for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre came from. You know, Leatherface, that's Ed Gein, like a for real person that did these things, and kind of seems even worse than the horror movie, to be honest. I mean, but anyways, it is said that the people in the town just could not take it anymore. And I cannot imagine. You just imagine too, like you're already losing your loved one, right? And you go to bury them, and then you find out they've been dug up, and like this person's been doing this stuff, and everybody thought he was a nice guy. Again, they just thought he was socially awkward. They called him literally the town weirdo. And I know that that sounds very like derogatory or not politically correct, but that's what it was back in the early 1900s, and that's what they called him. They called him the town weirdo, stayed to himself, and, you know, whatever. They had no idea what he was doing. And he was like reading these books and magazines and becoming obsessed with them, and he had no real social interaction with the outside world. And again, with the woman Bernice, it is said that he went up there, and I could only assume, this is me guessing now, he goes up to the store, and Bernice, being an older lady, was probably very nice to him. You know, she's seen him all the time in the store. She was very nice to him, and he asked her on a date. And she turned him down, and he shot her and took her home and cleaned her like a deer. Whoa. Now, Ed did spend the rest of his life at this mental hospital, and that is where he passed away. At the age of 77, on July 26th of 1984, he died of respiratory failure. Now get this. Remember how I was saying like his home was like becoming like this tourist attraction? It is said that over the years, people have gone to visit Ed's grave and have actually chipped parts of his grave off and have taken them home as souvenirs. Listen, I know a lot of us were into true crime. For whatever reason that you're into it, I'm into it because I like to learn from these things if I can. I'm interested in the psychology, why people do what they want to do, the nature versus nurture aspect, right? But to travel somewhere and chip a piece of the grave off and take it with you, I need somebody to explain that to me. Like, why? What is the point? Why would you want that in your home, your house, your hands? Ugh. Nevertheless, over the years, people have chipped off pieces of his grave and taken it home with them. And here's some interesting, but like also some not so fun facts about Ed Gein and his story. Ed's story has had numerous appearances in film, music, and literature. The tale first came to widespread public attention in the fictionalized version presented by Robert Bloch in his 1959 suspense novel called Psycho. Then there was an Alfred Hitchcock's 1960s film of the novel Psycho. Ed's story was loosely adapted in numerous films, including Deranged in 1974, In the Light of the Moon in 2000, and the Rob Zombie films House of a Thousand Corpses and its sequel, The Devil's Rejects. Ed was also the inspiration for multiple fictional serial killers, most notably Norman Bates, Leatherface that we talked about from the Chainsaw Massacre, Buffalo Bill, and Dr. Olive Thredson in the TV series American Horror Story Asylum. In 2022, Ed was featured in the episode of Netflix Jeffrey Dahmer's story as a possible inspiration of J.D. However, a direct connection has never been made. And Ed Gein is now known as the Butcher of Plainfield or the Plainfield Ghoul. Now, what are my thoughts? I mean, obviously. But I have heard so much about this story over the years, and his mom, Augusta, got a lot of flack. I mean, every podcast I've ever heard, everything has always been his overly zealous religious mother that kept him isolated from everybody. And I can't help but to wonder this, y'all. Okay, I can't help but to wonder this. I can't help but to wonder if Augusta, his mama, seen something in him, if she knew something was off and she was not keeping him from the world, as in, so the world don't corrupt him, but maybe keeping him from corrupting the world. I say that because we see tons of people that are isolated due to religious reasons, right? The LDS church and many different things, right? The path that Ed Gein took is not a normal path. I mean, hello, how many people, that are in different places, like way out in the Appalachian Mountains where there's not a lot of people. There's not a lot of people for miles and miles and miles. People grow up just around their close family. They don't go and dig up bodies and make nipple belts from them. So I wonder if Augusta knew something was wrong, like seriously wrong with her son, and was trying to keep other people safe. I don't know. Maybe not. But I mean, reading the Bible to your kid in the afternoon, I don't know. I can't help but to wonder. I can't help but to wonder that. And I also find it interesting that he would become obsessed over these books and then want to act them out. Weird. Have y'all heard about this story? Did y'all know that Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre was actually loosely based on a real person? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Other than that, I love you guys. Thank you all so much for being here, and I will see y'all in the next video. Love you guys. Bye.